Getting injured on the job is scary enough, but imagine being told you can't get any help, not because you lied, not because you didn't report it, but because of taking marijuana, which was a legally acceptable medical treatment. Well, that's exactly what happened to Corey Allen, a machine operator who was injured on the job and denied compensation because of a positive marijuana test. By the end of this video, you will understand how drug test results can impact workers' compensation claims even in states like Arkansas, where medical marijuana is legal. And why being legally allowed to use marijuana, even for medical purposes, doesn't necessarily shield employees from on the job consequences. And the importance of knowing both state law and your employer's policy and how the two collide in real life situations like injury claims, drug testing, and compensation denials. Hi, I'm Harlow Reed, employment lawyer, HR consultant, and creator of the HR Insider. On this channel, I do more than share my legal opinion. I break down real legal cases to show how the law might apply to your situation. Okay, so the case we are covering today highlights why medical marijuana still confuses so many people. The legalization of the drug has led some to underestimate the impact that marijuana can have on decisions at work, especially when they assume that they can function normally while under the influence of the drug. The case we are talking about today builds directly on my last video where we looked at what happened to Brian Davis, who was a worker fired after testing positive for medical marijuana. If you haven't seen that one yet, I'll link it in the description. When I review cases on this channel, I always look at the timeline from the moment the claim is filed to when it's finally resolved. I didn't call out every date in this video for the sake of time, but if that's something you're interested in, drop a comment below and I'll share the full timeline from when Corey Allen filed his claim to when the case was resolved. Okay, let's talk about it. The content shared on this channel is for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional legal advice. Always consult a qualified attorney or HR professional for specific guidance tailored to your needs. And don't forget to like and subscribe. This case starts with a young man named Corey Allen. He was placed at a company called FMH through a temp agency known as Employee Bridge Holding Services. FMH stands for FMH Conveyors. They're based in Jonesboro, Arkansas, and they build conveyor systems that are used in manufacturing, warehouses, and shipping centers. Their equipment is what you typically see in places that need to load and unload trucks or move heavy materials efficiently. Corey Allen's job involved handling some seriously heavy equipment. He worked with conveyor parts that weighed nearly a ton. His role required him to take a strap attached to a crane, loop it around the center of the conveyor part, and balance it just right so it wouldn't swing around. Once it was secure, he'd use a remote control to operate the crane and lift the piece into place. On October 24th, 2017, Corey Allen had just come back from his lunch break and was back on the job prepping conveyor parts. He was adjusting a strap around one of the parts, but he couldn't quite get it balanced the way he wanted to. So, to stop it from swinging, he braced himself against it. But as he tried to lower it, the part dropped too quickly and it slammed into the remote control he was holding, and it crushed his right thumb and his index finger. A coworker named Johnny Anderson had to step in and use a forklift to lift the conveyor part off of Corey's hand. Now, Johnny Anderson also drove Corey Allen to the hospital where Corey, was given morphine, Zofran, and lidocaine. Hospital staff also performed a drug screen, which was required by Employee Bridge, Allen's employer, in the event of an employee injury. The nurse who administered the test told Johnny Anderson that Corey Allen informed her that he did not want to take the drug test. Johnny Anderson then went to speak with Corey Allen about it, and he once again asked to have the hospital not give him the drug test. According to Johnny Anderson, either Corey Allen knew he was not going to pass it or he just didn't want to take it. Allen tested positive for marijuana and opiates, and he was terminated from his job because of the positive drug test. Corey Allen filed a workers' compensation claim, but EmployBridge pushed back. They disputed his right to receive benefits because of that positive drug test. They said that his injury was caused, at least in part, by drug use, which would make it ineligible for compensation under Arkansas law. Initially, the administrative law judge who heard the case agreed with Corey Allen and ruled that his injury was compensable, but EmployBridge, the staffing agency that placed him at FMH, they appealed that decision. Their argument was clear. Allen had tested positive for marijuana, and under Arkansas law, that creates a rebuttable presumption that the injury was caused by drug use. Now, a rebuttable presumption simply means that the assumption is that your injury was caused by your drug use unless you can prove otherwise. So, unless Allen could prove by a preponderance of the evidence that marijuana didn't substantially cause the injury, he wouldn't be entitled to workers' compensation. And this time, the appeals court sided with the employer and reversed the judge's decision, stating that Allen had not successfully rebutted the presumption that his drug use was the cause of his injury. Allen appealed again, arguing that the court's decision wasn't supported by substantial evidence. He admitted that it was the positive drug test that triggered the presumption, but he insisted that he hadn't used marijuana on the day of the accident, didn't expect to test positive, and never tried to avoid the test. Allen testified that he was not intoxicated, that he had used good judgment while doing his job, and that there was nothing he could have done to prevent the injury. The equipment simply dropped too fast for him to react. To back him up, he brought in a team leader named Thomas Bacon Hart. Hart said that he saw Allen at the pre shift meeting and that Allen didn't appear wobbly or impaired in any way. But another coworker, Cardarius Parchman, who knew Allen personally, said he had seen Allen use marijuana in the past. On the day of the injury, he said Allen's eyes looked bloodshot, and he believed Allen was using poor judgment or just wasn't paying attention. Terry Crowley, FMH's resource manager, reviewed the incident report and noted that Allen admitted he didn't judge the momentum of the machine part. She said she had never seen that kind of swaying with the crane and didn't believe there was any equipment malfunction, meaning the error likely came from Allen, who was operating the machine at the time. And Allen's supervisor, Johnny Anderson, agreed. He said that he had never seen an accident like that before and believed it happened because Allen had placed his hand where it should not have been, between the conveyor and the remote. But in the end, the Court of Appeals just didn't buy Allen's argument. They ruled that Allen hadn't provided enough evidence to overcome the presumption that his injury was caused by drug use. Now, here's where things get a little confusing. Medical marijuana was legal in Arkansas at the time. So, what if Corey Allen had been a properly registered medical marijuana patient? Well, he wasn't. And that distinction, it does matter. But just because marijuana is legal under state law, it doesn't mean you're automatically protected as an employee. You have to follow the exact rules to be covered. And even then, those protections are limited. And because Allen wasn't a registered medical marijuana user, the marijuana in his system was still considered an illegal drug under Arkansas workers' compensation law. But if he had been properly registered, the situation could have looked very different. For one thing, the marijuana wouldn't have been considered illegal. It would have been a prescribed drug under state law. And in that case, the burden would shift to the employer. They would have to prove that Allen would used marijuana in a way that went against his doctor's orders. And that's a much harder thing to prove because medical marijuana prescriptions simply say something like use as needed for pain. And the drug can stay in your system for days, sometimes even weeks after its effects have worn off. So just having a positive drug test wouldn't be enough to deny Allen's workers' compensation claim. It's also important to know that the Arkansas Medical Marijuana Amendment doesn't protect employees from being disciplined or fired if they're under the influence of marijuana at work. But that's different from the standard used in workers' compensation claims. For benefits to be denied, the employer would have to show that the worker used the drug in violation of the doctor's guidance. And that's a tougher case to make. Now, in Corey Allen's situation, coworkers testified that he had bloodshot eyes, showed poor judgment. That might support a termination under workplace policy, but it still wouldn't prove he used marijuana in a way that went against medical orders, especially if he were legally prescribed to use it. This case gives us a lot to think about. Let's look at just a few takeaways from Corey Allen's case. Just because marijuana is legal in your state, it doesn't mean you're protected at work. It's important to understand your employer's policies and the state laws and how they apply to your use of medical marijuana. Testing positive after a workplace injury, testing positive for marijuana, that is a huge risk and it can seriously jeopardize your benefits. If you are using medical marijuana, you need to use it as prescribed by your doctor because, of course, there are risks involved either way. But of course, when you can demonstrate the purpose of it and you can also show that you're using it as prescribed, it puts you in a much better position. But even with legalization, employers can enforce zero tolerance policies and deny workers' compensation claims, just like what happened with Corey Allen. This case is a clear example of why legalization doesn't equal protection. If you want to learn more about what happened to another worker, someone who was using medical marijuana legally, check out my video on Brian Davis. I'll link it in the description. Thanks for watching today. I'll see you in the next video.